We know we'll be criticized for doing this interview. Why did we do it anyway? American citizens have the constitutional right and the God-given right to all the information they can gather about matters that affect them. If their country is doing something with their money in their name, they have a right, an absolute right, to know as much about it as they can.
That's Tucker Carlson explaining why he sat down with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian a little over 2 weeks after the U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. President Trump has described those attacks as, quote, very successful, but Carlson explained he wouldn't be asking the Iranian president about that specifically because he thought, frankly, he would not get a straight answer. Let's take a listen.
Was your nuclear program totally disabled by the bombing campaign by the U.S. government a week and a half ago? There's no chance he's going to answer that question honestly. I didn't bother to ask it. The answer, in fact, from an American perspective, even from the CIA's perspective, is unknowable. And the purpose of this was not to get to the absolute truth. That's impossible in an interview like this. The purpose of the interview was to add to the corpus of knowledge from which Americans can derive their own opinion.
Carlson did, however, ask the Iranian president if his government is plotting to assassinate President Trump, a threat that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly warned US officials about in the lead-up to the strike. According to a report from the Daily Caller, in an attempt to convince the US to take military action against Iran, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Fox News in June that Iran's regime wants to, quote, kill Trump and views him as, quote, enemy number one. Here's the Iranian president's response.
Has Iran ever backed an assassination attempt against Donald Trump?
This is actually what Netanyahu is trying to insinuate and to make your people or the president of your country to believe. But this is wrong because Netanyahu, as I said, has its own agenda. It wants to drag the U.S. into forever wars, as I said, and to bring more insecurity, instability, and unrest to the whole region.
It's important to note here that the DOJ charged an Iranian national and others last November in a murder-for-hire plot to kill Trump. Carlson also asked the Iranian president if there were any Iranian sleeper cells in the US, to which he gave a similar answer, blaming Israeli propaganda.
Now, this isn't the first time Carlson has sat down with the leader of an adversary state. He received significant criticism back in February of 2024 with the sit-down with Vladimir Putin. And my reaction to this is largely the same reaction I had to that whole kerfuffle, which is that, no, it is good for journalists to do interviews with appalling figures. There's no reason to shy away from that. So the exercise of doing it at all is not bad. How it is conducted matters. And Tucker got a little... is a difficulty because of the translation issues. Had a difficult time holding Putin to just answering certain questions. You know, he went to the whole history of the Russian Empire, and people said it was a little bit soft. I still thought he got some interesting answers out of him. From what I've not seen this entire interview. I've seen some of it on social media. From what I saw, it seemed perfectly journalistically worthwhile to me. I thought those were good questions. I take his point that there's no point asking them whether their top secret nuclear capabilities were decimated. You're not going to get a truthful answer about that. Fine. He did ask him about the assassination attempts. He said that was all Israeli propaganda. I think that is useful and is something for the public to consider. In a sane world, we would then have our Congress, our elected representatives, discussing this and using it as arguments for and against greater military involvement or military disengagement from Iran. That's how it should go. So good on him for doing this. I don't have a problem with it. Some people are going to say, but it was less aggressive than the way, for instance, he treated Ted Cruz. Him and Ted Cruz are friends. It was more of yes, that was more of like a debate rather than a proper interview, I guess. So I don't really have an issue with this. I'm glad Tucker did it.
Yeah, I don't know what the world is coming to, because I agree with not only you, which happens fairly frequently, but with Tucker Carlson as well. I think that it is, in fact, important for American people, well, for any people, to hear the views of those with whom they strongly disagree, even if they consider those people to be repellent in some fashion. I think more information is better than less information. Yes, I think that as a general matter, interviews have to have at least some level of pushback to them. They don't have to be screaming matches, but you don't want regardless of who you're interviewing, should just be simply giving a platform for somebody to say absolutely whatever they like without any challenge. In fairness to Carlson, I don't think he did that, and he did seem to ask, as you put it, journalistically valid questions. Oftentimes, just to delve slightly into, well, not exactly personal history, but stuff that I remember. In Ireland, whenever there was still an IRA campaign, there were absurd restrictions sometimes on how one could speak to representatives of Sinn Féin, which was the political wing of the IRA at the time. And the rule that the British government imposed was, Gerry Adams was the best known leader of that group, you could interview him, but you couldn't broadcast the sound of his voice. So if you did an interview with him, you needed an actor to overdub the words that he was actually saying. The thing appeared to be, I think, intended to make it more cumbersome, so to therefore put broadcasters off doing it, and you couldn't get his instant reaction because you had to find the actor to overdub him. But things like that were ludicrous on their face. I would argue more seriously that they also damaged or delayed a peace process because people weren't as able as they might have been to actually hear views being debated.
Yeah. It is difficult to, we do preparation to decide what we're going to ask in an interview, and then sometimes the conversation takes a different direction than you want, and you got to just roll with it.
Yeah.
How adversarial to be? I like to not be overly adversarial because, I'm self-interested. I want people to want to come on the show and have conversations, but I don't want it to be so friendly that they think, oh yeah, we can do Rising because we'll never get any pushback and we just say whatever we want. I think the format we have, where you have two people from a different ideological perspective, helps guard against going too far one way or the other. But it's more difficult than people think to have it be the right level of fair and tough, but also, because we have so much power as the host, we can talk over the person, we can, rap, we can do whatever. Yeah. The format of a Tucker Carlson type thing, and we have some time constraints on our show, when you have no constraints whatsoever as Tucker and people who just, do it live for as long as possible.
Or whatever. Yeah.
It's great because then you really don't have to face the, well, I got to get in one more tough thing before we wrap, or I gotta edit this some way. I mean, that's what obviously 60 Minutes got in trouble with even if you say it was only for time constraints, condensing the Kamala Harris answer.
Which I do, but anyway, we won't get into that.
Well, I don't know I would not argue, I don't impute motivations. I don't know what the motivation was. I just argue that the condensing of it changed the meaning of it. I'm not sure. I'm not saying they did. You disagree with that.
We disagree.
I'm not saying they did it on purpose. Yeah. I'm just saying that was the effect. But it is hard. It's somewhat better for journalism if you don't even have to make those calls, because you can just have an unscripted go as long as you want. That's one of the things I like about the direction that media is taking in more not unmoderated, unstructured formats where you can just kind of talk for as long as you want and not have to make quasi-editorial choices that can cause a lot of frustration from viewers.
Yeah, no, and I think whenever there is that much longer format, there's less of a pressure to be adversarial in a very dramatic way. No, I don't mind doing adversarial interviews, and I've done some of them here. But the point is that when you have 90 minutes or something to talk to someone, you can actually say, well, you say that, but this seems inconsistent with X, Y, or Z. And then that is different from the standard, particularly in cable news, which is this sort of 4-minute compressed block where you either have to be, where you feel if you want to do an adversarial interview, you have to go at the person from the very start, and that creates a different tone.
Right, and even for the subject of the interview, the cable news format, I mean, they feel like they're going to be more likely to stick to talking points because, well, at least I know I have time to make my rehearsed, 20-second talking point, and it's the format, I think, lends to having less productive conversations because people are afraid to wander off because, well, what if I don't, this is so short, what if I don't have time to come back and make the thing my voters want to hear?
Well, and they can also filibuster, right? Yeah. If you're the interviewee in that cable news format and you could ask something you don't want to know, you can just repeat a kind of talking pointy answer, and you know that the interviewer typically doesn't have 10 minutes to ask you the same question 4 times to get a proper answer.
Yeah. After the break, the Hulk himself, Mark Ruffalo, is bashing Joe Rogan on social media. We will tell you why. Stay with us.